Hi everybody, I'm back, my MacBook's fixed, so welcome back to Pampered Wolf. Today we're going to be reviewing two different palettes. Actually we're not, we're going to be comparing two different palettes. I've already reviewed one of them in a previous video, so I won't be going into too much depth about that particular palette, but today we are going to be comparing the ABH Sultry Palette with the brand new Urban Decay Naked Reloaded palette. These are both beautiful palettes, but they are very, very similar. So if you already have this one, which came out a few months ago, do you actually need to buy this one? Well, today we are going to find out. We're also going to find out which one of these I actually prefer. So let's get straight into it. Okay, so let's just have a look at both of these palettes. Both of them are extremely similar, both absolutely beautiful, very, very wearable coloured shadows in both of these palettes. So let's just have a look at a photograph that I took earlier on of them both side by side so you can see how similar both these palettes actually are. So just so that you've got the information, the Anastasia Beverly Hills Sultry Palette is £46 in the UK, $45 in the US. It comes with 14 different shadows and it comes with a brush. So there are 7 mattes and 7 metallics. The Urban Decay Naked Reloaded palette is £38 in the UK, so much cheaper, $44 in the US, so not so much cheaper if you're in the US. It only comes with 12 shadows though and no brush, so 2 shadows less than the Anastasia Beverly Hills Sultry palette. It has 6 mattes and 6 shimmers. So let's just have a look at the swatches that I did on my arm earlier. Now the first one that you're seeing is the Urban Decay and the one next to it will be the ABH. So first of all we've got Bribe next to Fresh. Very, very similar. You can hardly see them on my arm because they are very, very skin coloured. So this might be used as maybe a matte highlighting shade or an all over shade for the lid. Next to that, we've got the Urban Decay Booked. And next to that one, we've got the ABH Birch. Very, very similar shades. These matte ones are quite similar also in consistency, although the ABH ones are slightly softer and slightly more pigmented. You have to press into the pan a little bit harder with the Urban Decay shadows in the Reloaded palette. So next to that we've got Retro from Urban Decay and then Bloom. Extremely similar shades. The one from ABH again is slightly more pigmented because it is softer, so you do get a lot more payoff. Then next to that we've got the Urban Decay Endgame, and next to that is ABH Dystopian. So let's jump straight into the metallic shades. Firstly, we've got Barely Baked from Urban Decay next to Steampunk from ABH. Steampunk is a little bit of a darker gold shade, whereas Barely Baked is slightly brighter, but they are very, very similar nonetheless. Then we've got Angel Fire from the Naked Reloaded next to Pearl from the Sultry palette. Again, very, very similar shades. Next we've got Reputation from Naked Reloaded next to Rose Quartz from the Sultry palette. Again, very, very similar. Rose Quartz is slightly deeper in colour. Next we've got Burn next to Cinder. And then we've got Dreamweaver from Naked Reloaded next to Cyborg. Now, I had an absolute nightmare of a time swatching Dreamweaver from the Naked Reloaded palette. It was very chunky, very bitty, very difficult to actually swatch in the first place. And it looks very, very silver in the pan, but it goes on more of a mucky brown colour. This is my least favourite shade in the entire of both of the palettes put together, and it's not very easy to use, so just be wary of that shade. So that's Dreamweaver and Cyborg. Cyborg is extremely silvery, which is actually what I was expecting more of from Dreamweaver, but anyway, never mind. Next to that is Distilled from the Urban Decay Naked Reloaded palette, next to Teak from the ABH Sultry palette, both very similar in colour. So you'll have noticed that I didn't swatch all of the shades. The ones that I left out were the ones that were not similar at all in either palette. So the ones in the Naked Reloaded palette that I haven't shown you already were these two shades here. So we've got Boundaries and Blur. These are two absolutely beautiful transition shades, one slightly warmer than the other. In fact, my favorite shade in this entire palette is the shade Blur. This is stunning. If you have pale skin like me, this is the most beautiful transition shade, and it just goes with absolutely everything. And there is nothing similar in the Sultry palette at all that matches that shade. They're all slightly deeper than that shade. But in the ABH palette, you also have things that the Urban Decay palette do not offer. So you've got a matte grey shade, you've also got a matte black, which is called Noir, which is really useful to really deepen up that outer edge and give a really dramatic look. There's also Twig here, which I didn't feature, which isn't overly similar to any of the other shades that feature in the Urban Decay Naked Reloaded palette, but in my opinion it's not needed within that palette, so it's just an added extra. Okay, so let's get some of these on the eyes. I'm going to put the Naked Reloaded on this side, and I'm going to put the Sultry on this side. And by the way, I do not have time to take all this off and redo it before I do the school run, so I will be doing the school run with two different eyes. I wonder if anybody notices. I hope not. I'm going to go for very similar shades. I'm not going to go out looking completely daft. So I'm going to go straight into the shade Booked. Usually I would go into Blur because it's my favourite shade. I will try out a look of all these shades on my Instagram page, maybe tomorrow or the day after, so do keep your eye out for that. I will do a lot more looks, but it will be on Instagram, not on YouTube. So I'm going to go straight into the shade Booked and use that as my transition shade. There's quite a lot of kickback in the pan. Very soft, really easy to blend out. Really quite like that. Let me just turn this light down because I think it's a little too bright. I think that's a bit better. So I'm going to try and do a really simple look because I cannot stand those YouTube videos where they try and use every single shade in the palette. It's just not necessary. It just makes things 10 times more difficult and 10 times longer to apply and blend. It's just not necessary. So I'm going to try something really quite quick and easy using a few shades. So I'm going to go into the similar shade to Booked in the Sultry palette, which is Birch. This one right here. And we're going to do the same on the other side. Again, there's a lot of kickback in the pan. There is all the time in ABH palettes unless you're using a metallic, and they're a lot firmer and a lot less powdery. Super pigmentation on both sides, to be fair. Just a little bit softer on the Urban Decay side. I think they are pretty similar. So because I'm doing something quite simple, I'm just going to deepen up the outer crease. For the Naked Reloaded side, we're going to go straight into Endgame, which is a beautiful brown, very deep brown shade. And I'm just going to pat that on and just move up into the crease a little bit, just to darken that outer edge. This is the darkest shade in this palette. If you're wanting a really dramatic look, then the best one for you to go for would be the Sultry palette by ABH, because it has that really matte black shade called Noir, which you can really deepen things up and make it look really dramatic. But this is the deepest shade in the Reloaded palette. Really beautiful. So I'm going to do the same on the other side using the shade Dystopian. which is this shade right here. Again, another really beautiful dark brown shade. Again, really, really easy to blend. I think both sides are very equal in pigmentation at this stage. Equal on blendability. I think the matte shades on both palettes are stunning, absolutely stunning. And I just can't pick a favourite from the mattes. I really can't. They both have kickback. They're both heavily pigmented. They're both easy to blend. There is no difference. Okay, so like I said earlier on, I'm going to keep this really simple. So I'm just going to put a metallic shade all over the leftover space on the lid with my finger. And the shade that I've chosen in the Naked Reloaded palette is Barely Baked. And the similar shade in the Sultry palette that I'm going to use is Steampunk. Both gorgeous shades in their own right. So I'm just going to take my finger and press Barely Baked on the lid. Really nice payoff, beautiful shimmer, not chunky at all, really smooth on the lid. Blend that in with the fingers. Really easy to blend in with everything else, even just using your finger, no brush required. That's just really, really beautiful. Gorgeous. Okay, so I'm going to use Steampunked from the ABH Sultry Palette. So it goes on and you get such a colour payoff. So as you can see, these are slightly different. I mean, you couldn't really notice a difference with all the matte shades that I applied before the metallic shades, but there is a slight difference in these two shades, namely that Steampunked in the Sultry palette is a deeper shade than Barely Baked in the Urban Decay side. The other things that are different in these two palettes with these shades, if you are using any metallic shade from ABH, you will notice that it is a softer consistency, and because of that you get more colour payoff. But with that colour payoff, it is slightly more difficult to blend out because it's a chunkier shadow, because it's a creamy shadow. It just leaves a slight texture to the surface of the lid. If you are worried about skin texture on your eyelids or any crepiness or whatsoever, then you might prefer the Urban Decay Reloaded palette, because these are a harder consistency shadow. And even the metallics are quite a hard consistency, and although you get the colour payoff, which isn't as much as the metallics from the Sultry palette, you do get a decent amount of colour payoff from the Reloaded palette, but you also get a smoother consistency and a smoother finish to the eyelid. And if you do worry about crepey eyelids, then this palette might be your favourite because it leaves a much softer, smoother finish. So let's just finish off the under eye. I'm going to go into Booked, which is the shade that we started with in the Naked Reloaded palette, this shade here, and I'm just going to go along the bottom of the lash line. The reason I really like shadows underneath the lash line is that if you're going to be putting shadows underneath the lash line, you don't need to take your concealer all the way up to your lash line. And I feel like this is where I suffer with most of my very fine lines underneath my eyes, are very close up to the lash line. So if you don't have to put concealer there, then you're not going to get crease in there. So I really like to apply a shadow to the lower lid, even if it's a really pale shadow. That's a really pretty shade. And then I'm just going to apply the same Birch on the Sultry palette side. Okay, so I'm going to go and do my mascara, eyeliner, all that sort of stuff, and I'll be back for the conclusion. Okay, so I'm back, and the conclusion is I absolutely love both of these palettes in their own right, and I obviously own them both now and I will use them both. But if you don't own them both, is it necessary to go out and buy the other? If you have the Sultry palette, do you need to go and buy the Naked Reloaded palette, or vice versa? And the answer is absolutely not. So there are a couple of differences with these palettes that I haven't mentioned previously in the review, so let's just talk about those now. Now, in the Sultry palette, it does come with 14 shades, whereas the Naked Reloaded palette only comes with 12. I've mentioned that already. Why am I mentioning that again, you ask? Well, in the Sultry palette, there isn't one specific transition shade, and I have quite pale skin, so I struggle with this a little bit. I usually use Birch as my transition shade, but once I've hit pan, that is gone. However, they have thought about this with the Naked Reloaded palette, and they've thought about what the transition shades are going to be and what shades you're going to use more of, and they've actually given you more of those in the pan. So you've got bigger pans of Boundaries and Blur, which they feel like will be the transition shades that you will use a lot. And they've also given you a bigger pan of Bribe, which they feel you're going to be putting all over the lid to set your concealer or your primer before you put the rest of your shadows on. So I think although you get 2 shades less in this palette, you're actually getting more or less the same amount of product, and you're getting more of the shades that you're actually going to use, which is really, really helpful, because once I've hit pan in Birch in the Sultry palette, I'm pretty much screwed for a transition shade within that palette, whereas this will last me a really, really long time. So let's just talk about the other differences within this palette. The matte shades are very, very similar. In the Sultry side, they are slightly more pigmented, but I'm really reaching. They're both easy to blend. They're both absolutely beautiful. You get kickback in both of the pans, but absolutely gorgeous. Matte shades really can't differentiate between the two. So I have no favorites where the mattes are concerned. Where the shimmers are concerned, the shimmers in the Sultry palette are far chunkier and slightly harder to blend, but again, I'm reaching in the Sultry palette than they are in the Naked Reloaded palette. If you're wanting a flatter, more seamless finish, then you go for the Naked Reloaded palette. If you're wanting a more dramatic look, go for the Sultry palette. The Sultry palette is definitely capable of giving you a natural daytime look, and then you can zhuzh it up for an evening and get a really, really dramatic look. Whereas the Naked Reloaded palette is stunning for the daytime, absolutely beautiful. And you can zhuzh this up for an evening, but not as dramatic as the Sultry palette, because the sparkly ones are far less sparkly in the Naked Reloaded palette than they are in the Sultry. So I guess it just depends on what you want to do with these palettes. I love them both. I will use them both equally. I will probably use the Naked Reloaded one more in the daytime, because I tend not to use very much makeup in the daytime, and I like more of a natural look in the day, so I will probably go for the Naked Reloaded. And then when I'm wanting a more dramatic look in the evening, it's the Sultry palette that I will be grabbing for, but time will tell. Anyway, I hope you found this video helpful. If you have, please do give it a big thumbs up. If you want to see more of these comparison reviews, please do let me know in the comment section below. Let me know what you thought of this. Don't forget, I'm also on Instagram as well, so if you're wanting to see more looks from the Naked Reloaded palette, if you're wanting to see what this palette can actually do, then make sure you'll follow me on Instagram as well. It's @PamperedWolf, all lowercase, no spaces. Also, if you haven't subscribed to my channel already, there is a watermark in this corner. If you click on it, it will take you through to my homepage where you can subscribe. Hope to see you all again soon. Bye!